The first subtle sign that you hate yourself is actually that you hate other people. It might not be the most obvious, but it's most obvious to me if you've ever met somebody who's always critical, always judgmental, or otherwise in a constant adversarial symbiosis, which is a shadow psychology term for ego identification via opposition with all the bad people in the outer world, you're likely to be encountering a pretty hateful person. And they hate themselves most of all. And the first sign that you hate yourself is that you hate other people, and this goes deep into shadow psychology because that idea of adversarial symbiosis is something which we really don't pay enough attention to. If you're trapped in a pattern of putting other people down to put yourself up, it's obvious that that's not something which you want to continue. But what about the more subtle version of this particular challenge? In this video, I'm going to give you 6 symptoms of self-hatred, and they're going to be both internally facing and externally facing. I'm going to give you solutions to each of them, or at least things that you can work on. But just starting with this first sign of self-hatred, you need to look at the subtle dynamics of hating other people. And this is where you need to be honest with yourself. If you've ever been in a moment where maybe you have a political leaning this way and there's somebody who represents a political leaning that way, or somebody that has a certain series of life choices which seem the exact 180 to your life choices, and you start saying comments like, well, of course they'd act like that way, there, insert the blank, or that's what I'd expect from somebody who, insert the blank, you're basically in this adversarial moment on a frequent basis. It's likely to come back to self-hatred because from a shadow psychology perspective, you are rejecting and disowning and otherwise projecting out some element of human experience, maybe not yourself, but human experience overall, which you find unpalatable. I'll give you a practical example. Right now, at this time of year, we're at the end of the tax year, and I've spent way too many weeks looking at how I can find ways to organize the money that I've earned and do it in a tax-optimized way, and I am shocked about how much tax I indeed need to make. And there's a moment when I notice, I wonder what it'd be like to be on an employment benefit. What would it be like to be just taking handouts from the government? Because I'm naturally thinking, well, where's my tax going to? Where is my tax going to? Especially, let's put it real, especially as someone who's making videos on the internet and mainly doing private mentorships with an international audience, I have a very, 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 very small portion of people who work with me from the UK. So I'm thinking, well, here's all the tax I'm paying out to the world, and I'm maybe seeing myself as a good character because I'm proud that I've made money, I've got a good business, and I've got tax to contribute. I believe that that's fair, and I believe that's right. At the same time, my adversarial symbiosis, where I put myself up a little bit grandiosely, is I'd subtly hate on someone who's not just working, but actively taking from the government, because I see in my inflated fantasy world, my tax money is going towards John down the street who's drinking and smoking and watching 5 hours of television per day. Is that really what's happening? Maybe. Maybe it's what's happening to some degree. Maybe there's some form of my tax money going off towards people who are taking advantage of the system when they could work, they could contribute. But what I'm actually doing in terms of my own psychology, my own self-love, self-hatred matrix, is I'm projecting out that part of me that maybe doesn't want to work as hard as I work all the time, would maybe have an alternative timeline where I'd enjoy just hedonistically giving a bit more to myself and not worrying about responsibility and ethics and virtues and values. There's a clear shadow. Just because a shadow's out there doesn't mean it needs to be integrated in. I don't integrate my shadow by then going and mooching off the government. And see, language. Mooching off the government, you can see what my value system is. I believe that it's not the best way to live. But the overcharge, the hatred, the adversarial energy, I'm bringing it up now in a video as an example, but I'm not bringing this up to my friends or people who are close to me. I'm not complaining on a daily basis. I had to really think of something I could bring through as a real example to try and bring some energy in. But if you notice these patterns inside yourself, if you notice different political groups, maybe even men and women, this is a classic one, you notice political groups, you notice different people who represent different values, or you notice the other half of humanity, and you're in this shadow boxing match where you want to punch down women, but also, not literally, hopefully not literally, but you want to punch down women and yet also get into bed with them, or you want to belittle the men, but also get into marriages and long-term relationships. It's just bizarre. you probably don't have as good a relationship with yourself if you're being really honest, if you're caught in these dynamics and you're feeding almost parasitically off this woman-hating or man-hating content on the internet. Just take a look back all the way inwards, which aspects of men, which aspects of women in your perceived imagination of what is masculine and what is feminine are you rejecting and disowning and pushing away? That's the way to heal this first sign of self-hatred. Moving on to the second point, and again, answering this question, which was very detailed about how to move from various forms of shame and aggression and trying to bring something a bit more broad. It was a very good question, but second sign of self-hatred, you poison your body and your mind. This is very simple. If you are poisoning your body and your mind, you do not have the dignity or the self-respect or even the common sense to treat your one body with love. There's a difference between occasionally going out and drinking for a celebration for a family member or a friend versus drinking every week. There's cigarettes, there's vapes, there's all kinds of substances. There's almost a timeline there where I can do this classic 3-4 minute spiel about don't do drink and drugs. It's obvious. Poisoning your body and mind is a subtle thing when you go to a bit of a deeper level, and that's where I actually want to take it. It's not just the substances you put into your body. I actually want to look at the mind aspect a little bit more, that body and mind element, because what does it mean to fuel your mind and feed your imagination with loving, positive, and ultimately beneficial concepts and thoughts and even the content that you're exposed to? I'm not saying that you need to be completely naively positively attuned to the world and never encounter negative energies and never engage with people who would bring you down. But just pay attention to the nature of mental nourishment. If you're scrolling, if you're spending too much time feeding on negativity, and if you're otherwise not actively nourishing yourself by picking up books, let's see which book I pick out. I'm going to pick a book that's going to be from the course coming up. Somatic Internal Family Systems Therapy. If you're not reading books like Somatic Internal Family Systems Therapy, which help you to heal your internal fragmentations and splits from a body-based perspective, that's pretty interesting because we're talking about body and mind, and Somatic Internal Family Systems Therapy is literally body and mind. You might think that I've planned that, but there's just an entire bookcase here. I'm pleased with the synchronicity. Body and mind coming together, watch out for the poisoning. The way to really fix this challenge here where you're putting yourself down or you're hating on yourself in an active way, if you're caught in addiction, that's obvious. Find a way to heal the trauma, find a way to work with people you need to work with and get that out of your life. If you're caught in the more subtle self-hating patterns of wasting your time on various low-level mental concepts, you can integrate that by creating better boundaries around content consumption based on high self-esteem. It takes us into a conversation around what is low self-esteem, what is high self-esteem, how can we develop high self-esteem, a concept I've discovered and explored and worked around many times on this channel. Fundamentally, you just need to have some bloody boundaries. You need to have a firm boundary against what you will put out into the world and what you'll let come back into the world, or let come back into you from the world. And in this case, if it's mental ideas, if it's things you're seeing on a screen, if it's a conversation you're entertaining with your friends, just have that boundary. Don't block them out completely, but just notice these moments. A few practical examples. You're with a friend who you love dearly, and the moment where they're sharing about their partner goes from the first 10 minutes of, okay, they're upset and they're complaining a little bit and it's completely healthy and appropriate. Just catch the moment when that becomes an hour of them complaining and ranting about their partner in a very negatively oriented, let's beat up someone who supposedly we should work together to then care about. If you're working with your friend to try and make things better, you're not really going to be supporting them by allowing them to continue for an extra 50 minutes saying how much of a insert the swear word they are. That's one moment in friendships, just catching the boundary. Again, boundaries are not always extreme yes and no. This is the last video that I produced. It's not all the way to the extremes. It's that subtle middle ground in between. Let them have 10 minutes of being critical, but that goes into your mind. And then say, hey, this doesn't seem so productive anymore. I know 3 times now you've said that she's like this, but is there something we can do about this? Or is there something that you need from me or something we can do for you that would help you feel better? Or maybe some deeper issue that we could look at together. Let's make a healing moment out of this. Would you be willing to do that? And you're like, wow, I just created the boundary for the type of energy that's coming in, but you also impact the quality of energy that you put out into the world, and that goes all the way deep into self-hating patterns at the subtle level, because you're not even allowing the people who are close to you to be wrapped up in that hating energy, again, being critical towards other people. They're in critical energy themselves, and you don't feed into it like a little parasitic gremlin. Boundaries. Boundaries are key to heal that second sign of self-hatred, that you're poisoning your body and your mind, and focus particularly on the many areas of subtle mental poisoning. If you're looking at ideas around hopelessness, if you don't believe that the world's heading in a positive direction, it might not be. But if you're going to be on this planet for many, many more decades, you are best served by looking at the best possible aspects of global expansion and how more people are getting more and more conscious, and you've got the opportunity to make meaningful contributions to the world through the internet and through all kinds of healing opportunities. Maybe those ideas, those deep philosophical ideas, also watch out for them if you're caught in that sludge. Just lift yourself out of it. And then we can move on to the third sign of self-hatred, looking at my post-it note. Interesting connection point. It's when you hate your job but you refuse to change. When you're spending the majority of your time working a career or otherwise in a position where you're spending 30, 40, 50 or maybe even 60 hours a week in something which you despise, just take a look in the mirror and realize that you are actively in a self-despising, self-refusing pattern that's really going to impact your self-esteem over the long run. I'm not saying that, again, I'm not saying is almost the catchphrase, because I have to be aware of how triggers happen on the internet. I can't have a really grounded discussion if you and I were having a private call. I wouldn't say, I'm not saying. It's because there's thousands of people who are going to be here with us, and it's just this moment where I say, well, if you hate your job, you need to move over here. I'm not saying this extreme shift. I understand that for seasons in your life, you work a crappy job. My first job at university, for 2 different summers, I literally scrubbed toilets to make money. I was cleaning student apartments, and I was scrubbing toilets and removing hair and gunk, and that's what I did. It was a season of my life. I needed the money, and I listened to podcasts and audiobooks while I was doing it, and I actually had a pretty good time, but it would be obviously a great tragedy if I stayed in that outside of university when needing money. If you're stuck in the same position for years and years and it's actively destroying your well-being, but you're not making that step to really take it somewhere that's more meaningful, you're not devoting yourself with a sense of discipline towards something which actually matters, and that's the way to heal the pattern. If you're undevoted, if you're lacking a reason to be in the world of work, I'd argue that this is one of the most important things that you should focus on this year, this month, and really get it sorted out before the end of this year. Make an exit strategy. Find a way to have the money that you need. Do it in a sensible way. Have a runway of 6 months or even 12 months where you wouldn't have to take any money in. It's easier said than done, but I've seen many different clients work with me who have gone from one career to another career. During the 4 months that we're working together, they've gone from career in state A in America to moving halfway across the states and then starting another career, and they've reestablished, and it all works out. But they need that courage and that confidence, and courage and confidence has a self-loving anchor which you can draw upon when you're in those difficult times of, will I actually say to my boss, I'm not going to be here next month? Or if you're your own boss, it's making transitions within your own business so you're not spending time or too much time doing things which are clearly anti-life. Personally, for me, I focus on doing long-form YouTube videos with one take where it feels like a real human moment, rather than trying to make 30-second optimized reels on short-form content where I'm doing all kinds of surprised faces, or maybe I'm getting something like my coffee mug and I'm putting it up front in a camera and I'm going, ooh, 5 signs that you hate yourself. And you just have a little attention span. It's all silly. I try not to do too much. I'm going to have some coffee. Maybe I'm poisoning my body and mind with my first coffee of the day, but hopefully not. Third sign that you hate yourself, you are staying in a dead-end career. This video is going quite long. I don't want it to be longer than half an hour. You know what to do. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of videos on the internet to get yourself from bad career to good career. Subtle psychology point is you want to be devoted to something that matters. I love my work because I'm devoted to enriching myself and enriching the world at the same time. And fundamentally, I have a service-oriented attitude towards the work that I do in the world, so that even when I feel resistance towards making a certain video, or maybe I'm feeling a bit tired and I wouldn't want to do a client session because I'd rather selfishly sleep or spend time in nature having a walk or something. It's just so They're such insignificant feelings compared to the greater sense of this is meaningful, this is purposeful. And that ultimately gives me a feeling of self-respect, and self-respect is one half of the self-love equation with self-compassion. Self-respect and self-compassion, the masculine and feminine principles tied together. That's my conception of self-love, and this shifts and evolves over time. And if you're spending 40 hours of your time every single week in a job which you hate, don't expect to be very self-loving. You just can't bypass that massive hole, that massive, massive hole of non-self-loving behavior. No amount of sand baths and organic smoothies is going to take you out of that obvious issue. Let's move on to the fourth sign of self-hatred, now moving towards a bit more of the super external perspective, but this is something which you really need to look at. I kind of touched upon it in point number 2. The world is ugly. Fourth sign that you hate yourself: if you believe that the world is an ugly place rather than being beautiful. If there is damage and decay and death and hatred and violence and evil, or otherwise just apathetic, consumeristic, what's the point in anything, and you're in that philosophy because your philosophy is shaping your body in a very literal sense. If you believe that the world is unsafe and dangerous and not worth engaging with, you're even bioenergetically speaking, posturally speaking, you're not going to be up on 2 feet and ready to meet the world with a firm handshake or maybe a nice smile. You don't have to be so masculine about it, but you're not in that. You're going to be crunched, you're going to be slumped, and you're going to be scared. Or at the very least, you're going to disengage and just go onto a phone. If you think the world is an ugly place, this is going to be one of the signs of self-hatred that you might miss, but it goes all the way deeper into identity formation. Our identities, from a psychological perspective, our ego, to be more specific, is formed through a series of relationships with other people, other situations, other institutions in the environment. There's an I and there's an other. The other could be mom, could be dad, could be brother and sister, could be the schoolyard, could be all of your friends at school and some of the bullies and the enemies. It can be the teachers. It's then the wider world. And because we're hooked on the internet, the other becomes what we're seeing out there, our idea of the world. And of course, our idea of the world is not the full picture of the world, because often the headlines that we're seeing, or at least the content that we're consuming on platforms like YouTube, is very much not representative of the entire world. If I were to turn off my phone and go outside into my immediate neighborhood, I'm fortunate to live in a nice rural area where there's actually pretty healthy, happy, normal people. I live in an area where there's generally people over the age of 50 and 60, to be honest. But I like that. I like that I can just have a normal conversation with someone who's going through kinds of either a good day or a bad day, but they're not caught in all of the drama and all of the decay and all of the world is ugly energy, because most regular people, especially regular people who are over the age of 50, 60, who haven't grown up with the internet, they might have some rumblings and grumblings about certain political situations. You know how old people can be, and they're like, in the UK, oh, these people coming over, or this way with the economy, or conservative UK kind of politics. They're still just not so tied into the world is ugly narrative. Maybe they're caught on this country's ugly, and they're not, Americans focusing on America, British people focusing on Britain, and every single resident of different countries focusing here. But the issue that you and I might have is that we're so plugged into the global perspective that we really need to be aware that if we're feeding into decay narratives, and you're re-identifying with the decay narrative as, let me phrase it this way, the world is in decay, and I'm a character who is presented with this world in decay kind of situation, you're really left with 2 choice points. Are you going to be the hero who changes the story, or are you going to fall into the apathetic disconnect? Well, it's nice to be the hero who changes the story, but what if you saw the world as a beautiful place with connection, love, compassion, and room for creativity, and you still get to be the hero? You don't have to lose out on your own self-actualization potential, but you can really shift the version of you who's actualizing out into the world by taking a broader, wider, and more honestly loving perspective of the best aspects of the world. And to some degree, it's tricking yourself. To some degree, there's like, well, if you're focused in on the worst aspects of a certain political situation, you ignore it within reason, but you also focus proportionally on everything else which is going well. And this is some real positive psychology, almost completely oversimplified. But if you do have that sign of self-hatred and you think the world is an ugly, malicious, and dangerous place, Don't expect that you're going to feel self-loving on the inside, because it's very difficult to feel like you're self-loving and you're in that state of being in love, that state of high self-esteem and safety and confidence and authenticity and courage, if you're about to go into a battleground full of damage and death. Something to really watch out for. Let's move on to the fifth point as we're wrapping up this video now. Fifth sign that you hate yourself, again, nothing to do with yourself, but it's to do with your inner child, and that's if you hate children, literal children. If you're the kind of person who's going through the park and you hear little boys and girls giggling on the swings, and you go, huh, nice for them. Wait until they grow up, wait until they've got to deal with taxes. You're an idiot. You're literally a moron. Maybe you've got trauma in your past. I get it. We all have our trauma, but if you're still in that way of looking at the world, if you see children, the joy of a child having fun, will come to children when they're misbehaving or having difficulties, but if you see playful children and you get like you get an anti-life feeling of one form or another, you are so fundamentally fragmented from your inner child, it's unbelievable. These kinds of people, unfortunately, have very little that they can do apart from accessing their inner child and learning to love the child that they were. Usually there's a variety of conditioning around mother and father being punishing towards them when they were a child. They've got some kind of story inside that being a child is bad, and they've just continued this for 30, 40 years. They can have hope to change, but usually if you're locked into this by your 30s and the kind of person who says, I'd never have children, they're just you can't connect with childlike energy. You can't enjoy the playfulness of a child and their innocence and their beauty and the marvel of life. It's a pretty good sign that you hate yourself, because you hate the inner child within yourself who isn't allowed to take place in your life. You've just lost that connection. But what about the more reasonable understanding of, well, I don't hate children, but I don't really like children. I say I even dislike children because they're messy, they're loud, they're demanding, they're dependent on you. These kinds of reluctant mothers, reluctant fathers, there's a lot of truth in that perspective for some people who are called elsewhere. Maybe you're a full-time creative, or you're someone who has other things that you want to do in the world, and you're kind of a bit adversarial towards the responsibilities you have to your child at times. That's normal. That's completely reasonable. That's like the shadow of parenthood, but not always does mom or dad actually want to engage with their own child because they'd rather have some time for themselves. That's completely normal. But if you're skewed to the extreme, where you don't even want to deal with children because you see them as problematic creatures who basically sap resources and energy, never have a child because of how much the child's going to cost or all the freedoms that you're going to lose out on. You can't lie in bed and you're stuck in a certain level of development. You haven't accessed the beauty of the inner child consciousness. And although there is a dark side to the inner child, which is a whole nother video, it's something that I've explored inside the Shadow Work Library at length. I've got a whole module on inner child healing. You can see it on the screen, and we've got this lesson on the dark side of the inner child. You can very much join me in the link in the description if you actually want to learn about niche and forgotten concepts within a very oversaturated theme. I'll see you over in the library if you're interested in that. Just be aware that the inner child needs to be included, and you also need to have a positive relationship with children in the outer world. And it's almost a great temperature check if you still dislike children having fun. You're in a pretty dark place, and I get it. I've been there myself. I didn't like children very much when I was 19, 20 years old. I didn't have that connection with my own inner child and trying to get on your case. I get it. But it's a sign of deeper trauma healing waiting to be pursued. Let's move over to the final self-hating sign for the video. This is a big one. This is a big topic. I can't cover it in full detail, but the sixth sign that you hate yourself, you hate God. Or at the very least, if you don't hate God, you hate your own soul, or you don't believe in your own soul. You don't have a feeling of soulfulness. You're not tapped in with the divinity inside of your own heart. If you're suffering from this kind of consciousness, if you are openly atheistic with a negative charge towards any concept around God, even the more secularized New Age concept of the universe, and you don't want to go for a traditional pathway, that's very difficult. That's very difficult to break out of. It's an extension of what I was saying earlier. If you see the world as ugly, if you see children as ugly, and you see God as an evil being, creature, he, her, whatever's going on, whatever your conception is, if it's negatively tilted, not very good, but maybe there's a bit of a saving grace in you having your own soulfulness. If you don't believe in your soul, if you feel like you've got no sense of divinity, no sense of greater purpose, no sense of greater being, no reason to really be on this earth, and it's all worms and death, I'm sorry, it's not true. That's really not the case. Anyone who's spent even a few hours in deep meditation and spent a few months in a row journaling usually gets to a moment of quiet inner revelation, or maybe a loud voice from somewhere unknown, that they are indeed worth more than the apathy and the decay which they're feeling in that current moment. Life could be very, very, very difficult. There could be all kinds of trauma, all kinds of abuse, all many, many, many reasons, from mom and dad not being who you needed them to be, why you'd feel like your body isn't sacred. Maybe someone who did something horrific to your body, you did something horrific to your own body. This desanctified, fleshy prison that's, you might as well stub cigarettes out on yourself and poison yourself with alcohol. That conditioning doesn't need to be your future. If you're not feeling the joy and the natural uplifting safety of knowing that there's a spiritual aspect to yourself, there's a variety of theologies you could take it down, but that central, I know I've got a soul. I know there's something more inside of me. I know there's something more than my name. I'm not just Jordan, I'm something more. And I'm in contact with that. And then you get to listen to your soul, you get to teach from your soul, you get to connect with other people at a soul level. The joy that naturally comes back in my face to even go away from playing with this concept of self-hatred and bring it back to a more soulful union is something which you really need to consider. And the main way that you can do this is through spiritual healing work and also looking into transpersonal psychology in particular. Transpersonal psychology, as a final invitation, has an entire module in the Shadow Work library. The link is down in the description for higher level spiritual psychology with an academic theme. Again, this is my best work ever. You can join me down there, and it is a mixture between private therapy kind of feelings and mini masters in shadow psychology, but that's up to you. Got these 6 signs of self-hatred. Let's rapidly go over them. First sign of self-hatred, you hate other people. Second sign of self-hatred, you poison your body and mind. Third sign of self-hatred, you hate your job, but you refuse to change. The fourth sign of self-hatred, the world is ugly and not beautiful. The fifth sign of hatred for yourself is that you hate children, you hate their little playful smiles, and you think that they're whatever you think they are. Not a good look. And the sixth sign of self-hatred is that you hate God and you're raging against the heavens. Or at the very least, you don't believe in your own soul and you're not connected to your own soulfulness. And hopefully throughout this video, I've given you a variety of ways to fix these issues. It's only half an hour on the internet. I can't do everything. You need to still look into deeper, more challenging, more complex issues around trauma healing. It's something I explore throughout this channel. Over 200 videos. You can join me in the next video on the screen, or you can join me, link in the description, for the Shadow Work Library. It's up to you.